This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicoladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
It's gone! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
We want to win. It's Seattle Sounders, bro.
Porter says cheated.
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder Hart wrote a commentary that we didn't take the Open Cup seriously.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Arietes. Today is Thursday, December 12th, 2024. I am Jeremiah Shan. Joining me today for this end of season mailbag episode is Aaron Campo and our engineer Lickett. Also, shout out to our sponsor, Full Pull Wines, and of course our readers. As you can see, I did not script my intro today because I don't know, I just didn't do it. What are you gonna do? Are you gonna get mad at me? Do people want my scripted intros? I don't know if they do. Aaron, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I kind of like the more natural, just sort of,
Just
ad-libs,
open the show.
conversational. Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, well, so here we are. It's been a crazy week, wild week here. No moves. Well, there were a couple smaller moves, but in the time between my interview with Craig Weibel on Tuesday and by the end of business on Wednesday, there were like two huge rumors that came up, and we're going to talk about. We are going to get to the mailbag aspect of the show, but because this is such relatively late breaking news, most of these questions are living in a world before these two rumors existed. I'm sure if you are a listener of the show, you know that the Sounders have been linked to trades for Jesus Ferreira and Paul Arriola from FC Dallas. They are, I guess, ostensibly separate moves, but they are linked, it would seem. In both cases, the Sounders are trying to get sort of distressed assets, I think is a fair way of calling it. But they're trying to get them on reduced contract numbers. So the broad parameters of how I understand this are with Jesus Ferreira, they're hoping to bring him in. He is currently a young designated player. The Sounders do not want to bring him in as a designated player, so they would have to rework his contract in a way that would result in about a roughly 25% pay cut in the short term. It would guarantee him more money in the long term. But I don't know that the Sounders are hoping that they ever have to pay that long-term money, because it doesn't really make sense for Ferreira. The gamble they seem to be making with Ferreira is, or the pitch they're making to him is, take a pay cut, put yourself in the shop window, and if you play really well in Champions Cup, if you play really well in the Club World Cup, if you play really well in MLS play, we are going to do our part to move you along. He's apparently still has aspirations of playing in Europe. He is only 24 years old. He has 53 goals in MLS play. I just want to put that in perspective a little bit. So Jesus Ferreira is the youngest player in MLS history to get to 50 goals. He has 53 goals, like I said. Chris Wondolowski, who is the all-time leading MLS goal scorer, at 27, at age 27, had 7 goals. So he is really on a breakneck pace as in terms of MLS scoring. But then but he is coming off a year where he was not very good. He was hurt a lot of the year. I think he only had like 5 goals and 6 assists or something like that last year.
5 goals, 3 assists.
There you go. Even worse than I said.
However, I do think it's worth pointing out that his non-penalty expected goals plus expected assists was actually pretty close to Albert Rusnak's last year.
Okay. So
now, whether that's a reason to be excited about Ferreira or a reason to be a little worried about Rusnak is up to you, up to your interpretation.
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that too. So, and then the other part of this was Paul Arriola is then all of a sudden, almost seemingly out of nowhere, this Paul Arriola news comes where the Sounders are trying to trade for Paul Arriola. Arriola used to be a designated player. He at one point was involved in the most expensive allocation money trade in MLS history. I think when FC Dallas got him, they sent almost like $3 million in assets to DC United to get him. It was a blockbuster trade, and he has been okay for Dallas for the most part. In fact, he had 5 goals and 6 assists last year. That's who had that. Playing mostly as a wing back, not much defense, but he was a pretty effective offensive-minded wing back last year. He's an interesting player, but these two moves together seem to suggest that the Sounders are maybe thinking a lot more about playing a 3-5-2 formation. And then on top of that, we've found out, or it's looking like Albert Rusnak is going to sign a designated player contract, which would probably be for just 2 years, is my suspicion. But anyway, taking us all together, and there's a lot to talk about. I think you can. I've seen a fair amount of excitement about this. I've seen a fair amount of trepidation about this. I don't know, Aaron, where are you falling? Are you like? Talk me through your emotions.
I've gone through a lot of them in relation to kind of all of this stuff over the last few days. And I think that in a vacuum and isolation, the move for Ferreira, assuming the return is reasonable, which I don't think we've heard any specifics, but MLS trades are generally pretty fair. I think like it's pretty rare that there's a trade in MLS where I feel like a team got totally fleeced. And the Sounders, I think, tend to do pretty well in their valuation. So assuming that the valuation is fair, I think it's a good move. I think it's a move with a ton of upside. If you get 2022 Jesus Ferreira, you are getting a guy who, if we had never heard of him and we signed him from Belgium for $10 million, we would be thrilled with that kind of production.
Right. Yeah.
He's exactly
a 24-year-old who is setting his domestic league's scoring record and 2 years removed from a massive season.
Yeah. And I think like the profile of player that he is, where he's a kind of a similar player to Jordan, but I think a little more well-suited, kind of like Jordan is a pretty effective wide player, but I think he's more well-suited to playing centrally. I feel like Ferreira is similar, but he can play behind the striker. He can be a little more effective wide, I think, than Jordan can. But I really like the possibilities that having the two of them in the same team could bring. I think that they could really complement each other well. They've looked good together when they played for the national team together. So I think if he hits that upside, everybody is going to be thrilled. And realistically, as you I think said a few minutes ago, if he comes in and hits those heights, the Sounders are probably going to make a whole boatload of money off of the sale to Europe. So I think I'm very happy with that move in isolation. Arriola, I think, is the kind of wingback, fullback. Most likely, he's not going to be a fullback if the Sounders are playing four at the back. But I think I'm starting to think that there's a really distinct possibility they're going to move to 3 at the back next year. And Arriola is exactly the kind of guy I'd want coming in to give some competition at that spot, or potentially just kind of be the presumed starter. He is not the defender that Alex Roldan is. No. That is for sure. But he's, I think, a pretty significant upgrade in the attack. And if Alex is still around, I think you've got options for both looks. You've got a more defensive option. You've got a more attacking option. He provides some really solid depth on the wings. I think he can even play sort of an attacking midfield type role.
I mean, he spent a lot of his career as an attacking winger.
But I think he can play centrally as well. Not as much as a creator, but as more of a just go at goal kind of attacking midfielder. So he's obviously a less exciting player, but I think we've talked a lot about we want to see some roster turnover, we want to see some competition, and he's like that perfect sort of profile there. The Rusnak one, I like Albert Rusnak a lot. I think that he is underrated at a lot of things. I think his ability to control possession, his ability to maintain possession, his passing vision, he's a very good creator, but I think he's elite at finding the pass that leads to the pass and breaking lines. He's good defensively for the role he plays. I really like him a lot. I am increasingly not convinced that he's a DP. I've spent a lot of time looking at his underlying numbers over the last couple of days, and so per 90, he had 0.43 non-penalty XG plus assists, expected assists last year. Ferreira had 0.39. And this is a career year for Albert Rusnak. His expected goal contributions were 12.2. He had 22. That's not including secondary assists. This is Football Reference, so they don't have secondary assist numbers. He had a great year. I don't think anybody expects him to sustain those numbers. He had 6 assists from set pieces. His entire MLS career previous to last year, he had 7. And for a lot of his time in Seattle, his first 2 years in Seattle, obviously he wasn't the primary set piece taker, but he was the primary set piece taker for Real Salt Lake. I don't Albert as a TAM player, I love. I think he's a really good value there. And as a DP, I'm not as convinced. And if he's back, I'm not going to be upset about it. But I think if you'd asked me this question last week when we recorded, and I think you did, I was on the fence, but more on the side of I think you should bring him back. And I've kind of flipped, right? I've kind of flipped a little bit. If he comes back, it's certainly, I don't think, the end of the world, especially at 2 years. I don't think, given a 30-year-old, a 2-year deal is any cause at all for concern. But it is just the opportunity cost of what you're doing with your DP spots. I think that's the concern.
Yeah, I would say broadly speaking, like if you look at in a vacuum, you look at each one of these 3. Let's consider this 3 moves, right? I think you can like a lot, like maybe even really like all 3 moves by themselves. I think what the trepidation comes from, what is this? How does this fit into a larger picture of the offseason? And I think from a roster building perspective, I am okay with Jesus Ferreira and Paul Arriola being 2 of the more notable additions, in part because they are relatively proven players. They're veteran players. They have something to prove as well. Like they are young enough where they have some upside. I really like this team build from a hit the ground running perspective. I feel like as the team is built right now, there's no reason to think they can't make a run at CONCACAF Champions Cup. There's no reason to think that they can't be really good in league play. I don't know that there's anything that they could do where you would actually feel good about their chances in the Club World Cup. So I'm just going to put that part of it aside. But I like the way the team looks. Where I am concerned, though, is what else we're going to see from an ambition perspective. Because one of the things that we have been talking about a lot on this show is sort of this malaise that has come over the fan base. And part of it is the Sounders just aren't playing that exciting soccer. They're winning, but they aren't necessarily winning hearts and minds. And I don't know if in this offseason on paper, going into this offseason, this seemed like a chance to sort of reset those expectations and get excited, and bring in, make some splashy moves. And those might still be coming. I don't want to say that they're not coming because, they could, there's still flexibility to do some biggish stuff. I just don't, and so that that's the reason I'm not quite as excited is I just don't know. I don't know what else is coming. I thought Craig said a lot of the right things about having money to spend, wanting to go out and buy some, he essentially said this is what they're going to do is they're going to go and get some proven attacking talent and then maybe supplement that with, younger players. So we'll see if the supplementing comes or not. But I don't know. I guess I'm having it. I'm trying to have it both ways. Like there are things about this I like. I'm with you on Albert Rusnak. I think I would have felt a lot better about giving him a long-term deal on TAM money than bringing him in as a locked-in DP, even if it's just for 2 years. So I don't know. We'll see. Nothing has been announced yet. Nothing's been signed yet, as far as I know. But it's been, people wanted action this offseason. It's been an exciting offseason. I'll say that,
It has. Yeah. It didn't take it long.
No. And it's funny. It reminds me a lot of 2017 when the Sounders went and traded for Will Bruin and Harry Shipp. And sort of Arriola and Ferreira are like Harry Shipp and Will Bruin on heavy doses of steroids. And I mean, and notably, they also did not sign a DP that winter either. But they had a good year. They went to MLS Cup again. They didn't win MLS Cup, but it was hard to argue with the results as a whole. But yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. I will say I would love it if the offseason continues to go at this pace. From a totally selfish content producing perspective, it's given us plenty to talk about.
It's true. I mean, this sounds judgmental, and I'm not going to lie, it kind of is. This is the part about being a sports fan that a lot of people like more than the actual games. And so, it's exciting. Everybody wants new shiny things. I'm certainly in that category. But I'm going to be much more relieved when the rumors are done and the players are actually on the team, because I mean, as of recording time, we're talking about the Ferreira deal like it's, or I am at least, like it's a done deal, and there's actually absolutely no indication that that's the case. I mean, it could very easily end up not being anything. So,
yeah,
I'll be much happier if and when there's an announcement. So we can start talking about the next rumor, because I'm sure there will be a million more of them.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. But anyway, so we did, this is a mailbag episode. We have some questions. We may as well jump in. I think we've exhausted this, right? To the degree we've
we've got to save some for later too, because if he actually, if they actually do get signed,
right, we're gonna have to talk about it again.
Yeah. So we want to keep something in the tank.
Right.
Well, let's kick it off with one from Relio, our good friend of the podcast, the blog, and ourselves personally. If you could have had either Paul or Yamar healthy for that last match, which would you have picked and why?
I mean, it's got to be Paul, right? As it was, like I don't think Yamar I mean, I suppose you could talk yourself into Yamar preventing that goal. It's not too far fetched, but I think their defense was good in that game. It was a nearly flawless defensive performance, and I don't know if Yamar gets them any, the marginally closer to flawless that they would have needed to be in that game. Whereas Paul, I think you can imagine him having more of an impact, potentially scoring a goal or getting an assist. So I'll say Paul, but it certainly does leave you with a lot of what ifs. I think rather than being comforted, like I thought that the Galaxy would run over the Red Bulls, and they didn't really run over them, but nothing that I saw from the Red Bulls diminished my belief that the Sounders would have won if they had made it to MLS Cup.
Yeah, I honestly think there's a good chance the Sounders would have won more comfortably than a Galaxy, and the Galaxy won pretty comfortably. So yeah, I think it was a tough pill to swallow. But in terms of the question, I completely agree with you. I think Paul is the clear choice there. I think that's a game he was made for. There was just so much room for his annoying little Nat style of play that I think could have really delivered some pretty significant dividends for the Sounders. So I'll be thinking about that one for a while for sure.
Yeah. All right. From Twimberly 23, how much of this year's offensive struggles are personnel versus tactics?
I think this is a great question, and I've been thinking about it for the last week or so since it popped up in the Discord. Because I think the answer is not either or, but both. I think that obviously the Sounders could have played more attacking tactics and they probably would have scored more. But I think the personnel that they had justified the tactics.
Yeah.
I think that the way they played was the right way to play for the personnel that they had. I also think too that the offensive struggles were really bad when they were bad, but they really didn't struggle that much offensively in the second half of the season. They were not
for the second half of the season. If you're just going from the midway point of the season until the beginning of the playoffs, they averaged like 1.8 goals per game.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like they were bagging a bunch of penalties. They were mostly scoring from the run of play. Now, a lot of set pieces, like going back to the Albert Rusnak thing, but 1.8 goals a game, I'll take that. I mean, that's still not like elite in MLS right now. I mean, MLS has gotten to be a pretty high scoring league, but you are not worrying about your offense at 1.8 goals per game. That's for sure.
No. I think, and I think in the playoffs, like you want to, if you're a really sound defensive team, you want to double down on that and play to your strengths. I think that the Sounders could have played more aggressively in the playoffs and probably would have scored more. And they may have gotten just as far, but I completely understand the choice to play the way that they did. So I do think that the personnel determined the tactics, and the tactics that they used were the right way to go. However, that being said, they need to get better in the attack. And I think they can do that without getting significantly worse in the defensive phase of the game. They just have to add players. Like, you just can't. I think that there's this mindset that people have, this belief that they've settled into, that Brian Schmetzer is just a defense first coach and that his teams are always going to be low scoring. And I think a Brian Schmetzer team is always going to be well organized and he expects everyone to play defense. But he's coached some pretty high scoring teams. And it's easy to forget because it's been a few years, but I think he wants to play more positive soccer. But I think more than anything, he wants to win games and keep his job and win trophies.
Yeah, and I just did the math real quick, so I'll just share it. But if the Sounders had scored all season at the same pace they scored over a pretty large, like half a season is not a small sample size. That's a 61 goal season. No one's so it's not like they have to transform their like if they can just use the tactics that they used during the last half of the season. That's a very good offensive season. So I don't think that they need to, and they didn't lose anything defensively in that second half of the season. They were really good defensively as well. So yeah, I mean, I guess to your point, I do think it's more personnel, and if they have a few more, clubs in their bag, that bodes well. That bodes really well.
Yeah. All right, this one's from Boomstick315. Any chance Morris demands a move if he is pushed back to the wing? He seems to think that playing the 9 is his best / only chance back into the USMNT.
That's a good thought. I don't know that playing as a 9 gets him any closer to the U.S. national team than playing on. Like, if he's bagging goals as a winger, he's gonna. I actually would think that's an easier path because the U.S. doesn't have a bunch of goal scoring wingers, and the way he made it onto the World Cup team wasn't so much because he was a number 9 or a winger. It was just that he had the ability to stretch the field in a way that no one else really on the roster did. So I still think that pathway still exists regardless. And I don't know. I think we're going to see him on the wing this year. If they get Jesus Ferreira, his best position is as a 9. And so you end up now with 2 players whose best position is the 9. I think we're probably going to see them both playing multiple positions. They'll probably both play up top at times. So you'll probably, like as we alluded to, we'll probably see some 3-5-2. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they manage it.
Yeah, I think a 3-5-2 with both of them up top, Rusnak and Pedro below them, 2 defensive midfields, wingbacks. That sounds like a lot of fun to me. However, fair to point out this question was asked before the Ferreira rumors were a real thing.
Right.
But it's still a totally fair question.
Oh yeah, I guess I didn't even answer the main part of it, which was, is he going to demand a move? And I don't know. I don't think he's. I don't know. I mean, I think if foreign teams come in to the Sounders and say, "Hey, we'll give you $5 million for Jordan Morris," I think the Sounders would probably take that.
Yeah, they would be insane not to. And I say that as a very confirmed Jordan stan, but
yeah, but I don't think Jordan's going to force his move to another. Like, I don't think he's going to pull Jesus Ferreira and try to force a trade or something like that. But
yeah.
All right, this is from Veritatum7. And now I'll just remind everyone, all these questions come from our Discord. We've been adding a lot of people to our Discord lately. I would urge you, if you are a supporter or above, to send an email to support@sounderatheart.com, and we will send you a link to get into the Discord. It's I realize that's a little cumbersome. Like, it would be cool if we could just automatically add everyone, but that's not how the system is set up, unfortunately. So I apologize. But yeah, come join us on Discord. It's a lot of fun. Especially on days like the last 2 nights where it was just going crazy, and we have hundreds and hundreds of comments as we're trying to kind of track these things. But anyway, the Club World Cup will see each club getting $50 million for participating. Since the Sounders won't see that money till the summer, is that something the team can immediately borrow against this offseason for free agents? Or do you see this as money for the following summer and after? Or is it something else entirely?
Well, I have good news for you. We don't really have to worry about it because they're not going to get $50 million for participating. It's not going to happen. There's no chance in hell that it'll happen, unfortunately. I would love it if it did, but it's just not feasible. I think Andre Villas-Boas, the coach of Porto, said that the UEFA clubs were getting something like 16 million euros, and the UEFA clubs are almost certainly
I think
getting...
he may have even said that Porto is getting that much.
Right. So I think if they're getting 16 million, you got to assume the bigger clubs are getting even more than them. You got to assume that the South American clubs are getting a little less. The African clubs, the MLS clubs, the Mexican clubs are going to get a little less. But there's a team from New Zealand in this tournament whose, I think, entire payroll is like $9 million a season, if that.
No, it's way less than that. Auckland City's, maybe that's like $2 million.
Maybe that's the combined transfer value of the team, something like that.
Maybe like that. Auckland is like almost a semi-pro team. Yeah, there is a team. Yeah, I don't even know. I'd be surprised if Auckland's salaries are even public. It's like it's not a big club. And so I'll add a little bit more to this. One of the things
it's 8.7 million euros is the total market value of the squad.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's actually higher than
where I got that number from. But it's 20, 30 guys that are worth like $200,000. So
right. Yeah. The Sounders, for comparison, are worth like 49 or 50 million, just to put that in perspective. But one of the things I read was that FIFA is reluctant. Like, the $50 million thing was a number that was thrown out there a long time ago. And I feel like I have debunked that multiple times over, but I don't know if it was ever true. It may have been a number that FIFA floated to some of the big clubs saying like, hey, would this convince you to plan this thing? But that's not, the Sounders were never going to get 50 million, and they certainly aren't getting 50 million now. If they get 5 million, I think that would probably be, the Sounders would probably be thrilled by getting 5 million. I think I got like 700,000 when they played in the Club World Cup last time. And the Sounders, I don't know, the Sounders may even get docked money because they're hosting games. I don't know how this is all going to work, but it's probably not going to be this enormous windfall that would dramatically change the transfer budget. You would like to think that it would impact it in some level, because it is going to be, there's money coming from this thing, whether it's from ticket sales or from some kind of automatic payout. But it is not going to be the sort of franchise altering a sum of money that it looked like, for a brief period of time, it looked like it might be.
Yeah. And I think too, the other thing to keep in mind is even in a world where it was $50 million, the league is going to take a huge chunk of that. Because the league, I mean, the Sounders are a franchise of the league. Manchester City, Real Madrid, they get all the prize money because they are independent entities that are part of an association. The Sounders are the franchise of Major League Soccer. So there's revenue sharing to an extent that there just isn't in other leagues.
Right.
All right, the next one is from Andrew. Is Adrian Hanauer's ownership still a strength for the Sounders, or is it something they are now going to have to succeed in spite of?
I think it's a complicated question. I think that Hanauer is not spending the way that other MLS owners are, and I think he deserves criticism for that. But I also think he deserves some credit for continuing to run a business that, and I don't want to sound too like capitalistic here, and it's like I'm not praising him for running a solid business, but I do think there's an element of it being a community asset that he's setting it up for long-term sustainability, right? And I think that is useful. But in the short term, it's very frustrating to see the lack of obvious spending that seems to be happening. But they are winning. They still are making sound soccer decisions. And I think that Adrian's leadership plays a role in that. Whether or not, like, how much credit does he deserve, I don't know. But he's also, I think Adrian is also setting he's doing his part to set the league up in a way that allows the Sounders to still thrive. So I don't know. It's definitely a double-edged sword. I tend to think he's probably still more positive than negative, but like I get why people are frustrated with the spending habits, and I can definitely sympathize for sure. I think he, like, that aspect of it. I do wonder if he appreciates how important it is to inject excitement into the team through spending. Like I do wonder if he appreciates that as much as he should.
Yeah, I don't, it's an interesting question. I think he has to some extent, but it almost at times feels like and this is only related just to me making assumptions about a lack of spending, that he's almost doubling down on things to be like, no, we've had a lot of success using this model and we're going to continue doing it. But I mean, I think that a sustainable business obviously has to be fiscally responsible, has to live within its means. And I appreciate that a great deal about Adrian's stewardship of the club. But I think a sustainable business also has to have a model for sustainable growth. And that entails spending money and continuing to be relevant, continuing to win trophies, continuing to have high attendance. If you're going to build a stadium, especially if you're going to build a stadium well outside of downtown Seattle, you need to keep people interested. You need to keep people excited. And I think a lot of people that are still going to games, frankly, are doing it because of inertia. Like, I don't think you can always count on those people. I don't think you can count on 30,000 people coming to a stadium in Tukwila just because that's something they have always done. So
No, yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes No Sarietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. We've been independent since August of 2023, but need your support to make sure it continues. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible by your continued support. Memberships start as low as $25 a year, which not only helps make podcasts like this one happen, but also gets you access to everything we produce. If you're able to support us at higher levels, starting at $75 a year, you gain access to a host of other perks, most notably entry into our members-only Discord, where the smartest, funniest, and most engaged commenters share their thoughts and ideas. To find out more, just visit sounderatheart.com and click the subscribe button in the top right corner. Thanks for listening.
I mean, I try to give, I have season ticket. You and I have season tickets together. You and I don't use those season tickets very often. And it's, it's work to give them away every week. And it's not because people don't want to go necessarily. It's just that they have lives, and you sort of need to keep growing the fan base, because people's lives get more complicated as they grow up, as we've all found. And so if you're not growing your fan base, you're going to be shrinking your attendance.
It's true. And I think some of that has been a failure on the part of the Sounders to reach new fans. Like, I don't want to let them entirely off the hook, but I also think that it's just the nature of not being the new hot novel thing in town anymore. The Kraken are here, and I think a lot of people who demographically would have been Sounders fans in 2009 have become Kraken fans, and I don't think that's something the Sounders can really do anything about.
And the Sonics are going to be here soon enough, and
the Mariners are not good, but people are going to the
Mariners
games
are
again.
a team where they can, every time the Mariners get good, you see the excitement sort of like go through the roof. And if they ever get sustainably good, that's going to suck up even more oxygen.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're going to have to spend money at some point. And I think Adrian is not a guy that's going to spend money for the sake of spending money. And I think that maybe the disconnect between the way he sees things and the way you, well, I don't want to speak for you, but the way I see this is that to him, if he thinks they can put together a very competitive team that gives them a chance to win trophies without spending a transfer fee, without going out and spending money on players, he doesn't see any reason not to do that. And for me, I would like to see evidence that he is willing to spend money to go get good players. And that's important to me as a fan. It's important for my investment in the product and all that. So, he knows a lot more about running a soccer team than I do, obviously. And I don't want to have a Dunning-Kruger thing going on here. It's pretty baffling. And I know that they did just sign Pedro de la Vega, but my whole thing has always been, they signed Pedro de la Vega, and a few years ago they signed Nico Ladero, and then went out and got Raul Ruiz pretty shortly thereafter. Like, I get that you can't pay a big transfer fee every season, but it's been 6 years.
They've paid one transfer fee in the last 4 seasons.
Right. And they've paid one sizable transfer fee in the last 6.
Right. Well, it depends on how you count Chu, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, since right, the last real big transfer fee they paid before De La Vega was Rui Diaz, essentially, is what you're saying.
Rui Diaz. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily think that that's a model that's going to set you up for great success in MLS going forward.
No, and it's worth noting that the only team that is spending less on transfers right now than the Sounders is Sporting Kansas City. And Sporting Kansas City is not, like, they're not the worst team in the league, but they are much closer to the worst team in the league than the best team in the league.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. And I think, too, the Sounders are fortunate in that they locked up a lot of key players to good deals in maybe a less spendy era of MLS, and those guys are going to age out at some point.
Right.
Like, you're not going to have Christian Roldan and Jordan Morris forever. you're not going to always be able to land a Jackson Reagan. You're not always going to be able to produce an Obed Vargas. Like,
right. Yeah,
you're going to have to replace these guys.
They've hit a sweet spot in sort of controllable. Like they're in a sweet spot of having a bunch of really good players who have relatively controllable contracts, and I don't know how sustainable that is for the long. Like you always would like to have some of those players, but they have a lot of players who are still a core of their team who they didn't have to pay transfer fees for. And that's probably not a sustainable model. Nowhere in the world is that how it works.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. This is from Danicus. There's been some small discussions about moving on from Nuhu in the offseason. Do you feel like this is the right move?
I would be open to either fullback moving if the Sounders are planning to play primarily forward at the back next year. I think that if they're gonna play 3 at the back, even a decent amount of time, even if it's not like their all the time formation, I think Nuhu is maybe the perfect left center back for that formation.
Yeah.
The stuff that he's really, really good at, that is the one position on the field, a left center back and a three back formation, where that stuff matters the most, and the stuff that he's maybe not as good at matters the least. So I would love to have him as a left center back on the team. If they're still planning to play 4 at the back, I don't think that he needs to be moved. I personally, just for sort of stylistic reasons, wouldn't mind it. And it also clears the way for Reed Baker Whiting, which, is a positive thing as well. But I don't think it's something they have to do. But I absolutely don't want to do it if they're going 3 at the back.
I would agree I would agree. I don't think I have much to add to that other than I think he is a potentially elite left center back and a passable center left back, and it's only worth moving on from him if you're getting a really good offer.
Yeah. Yep. You would think I would be good enough at podcasting at this point that I could have just segued right into this next question, which is about Reed Baker Whiting, and it's from Ken W.
That's the charm.
It is. It's true. Being bad at, I think that is the thing that people like about podcasts is when they're bad. So that explains our longevity.
You can't be too slick.
What is Reed Baker Whiting's path, and could he surpass either / both Nuhu and or Alex next season?
I would say that he definitely has the potential to pass both of them. I think the Sounders would love for that to be the case. In fact, the thing that's frustrating about Reed Baker Whiting is that almost this time last year, we were having this almost exact same conversation about how next year is going to be a big one for him. And he might, if he can get that starting spot, that would be great. And unfortunately, injuries cost him like half the year. And by the time he came back, he never really got into contention for being a regular starter. Like I think he only made 5 starts. He played in a fair number of games, but it was mostly as a reserve, and it was oftentimes even as a reserve who was, he came in as a midfielder that was in it mainly to try to shut down a game. So he didn't get a lot of run in the positions where he seemingly projects to have the highest potential. So I think that there's a pathway to him winning the right back job. There's a pathway to him winning the left back job. There's a path to him, if the Sounders are playing with wing backs, there's a path to him winning one of those jobs as well. I think there's multiple paths for him. But this is going to be a big year, and I think, especially if there's been a lot of expectation that he will eventually move to Europe on a sizable fee. And this is probably the year where he needs to show that type of potential if a move like that is in the offing.
Yeah, 100%. I think too, he's another player that could really benefit from the Sounders moving to a 3 center back setup, because his defensive shortcomings, I think, are going to be a lot less pronounced as a wing back than as a fullback. And I think that could just help him feel more, because it felt like a lot of his defensive shortcomings last season were a result of nerves, And so I think if you take some of that defensive pressure off, maybe it's not as big of a problem.
Yeah, this is from Jared. Are we likely to get a new contract for Obed before making any new moves? Any moves for him, I suppose, or I don't know, maybe in moves in general. Seems like a big contract would fit him and provide some leverage for summer negotiations.
I would guess no, because I would guess Obed doesn't really have any interest in signing a new contract. Because I think this is a situation where if he knows that the odds are very good that he's going to be moving in the summer, the only thing that signing a new contract can do, two things it's going to do. It's going to give him a little bit more money for 6 months or however long, and it's going to give the Sounders more negotiating leverage, which makes a move for him less likely. I still think he's moving no matter what, but I think that there's no reason for him to put himself in less likely of a position to move, because I think this is the summer is going to be, it's not the last window in which he could move, obviously, but I think it's going to be the last window in which he can move for big money as sort of an elite prospect, right? If he has another season exactly like this next year in MLS, instead of potentially going to a bigger club in Europe or a smaller club in a top league, he could be moving to Belgium or something like that, and just not setting himself up for the next move as well as he would maybe like. So I don't know. There's definitely a benefit to the Sounders, to have him under contract for a little bit longer. But I do think that MLS clubs are already in such a poor negotiating position that it's really just a matter of degrees. And it's really, probably not worth potentially upsetting him.
Yeah. I don't think he needs to sign a new contract. To answer the question directly, I don't think he needs to sign a new contract before he makes a move. I'm a little more inclined to think that they will sign him.
Interesting.
But I don't. You make some compelling reasons not to, but I would think having extra money in his pocket would be worth it. And I don't know that it's going to change. Like, I don't get the sense that he's like pushing his way out. Like, I think he wants to move when it makes sense for everybody involved. But yeah. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah,
I mean, that's I think you probably have better insight into that than I do. And I do think that the nature of this kind of stuff in MLS, or just in a league the level of MLS, is probably different than it is in a lot of other places. So this one's from The List. Any potential changes to the coaching staff?
Not that I know of. In fact, we talked to, someone asked about that at the press conference, and Craig seemed to think that everyone was most likely coming back.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a straightforward answer. I will say, I thought the coaching staff did a pretty good job. I think the coaching staff maybe did I think you could even say the coaching staff did a really good job. The way that they sort of turned the season around, I think goes a lot of that to coaching and if not literally tactics, I think just the soft skills of coaching.
Yeah, I think too. I mean, you don't accidentally go from being one of the worst set piece teams in the league to one of the best without there being some significant work on the behalf of the coaching staff. There's just very concrete things you can point to that wasn't just the players figuring shit out on their own,
Yeah. This is from Nate B. Where do you see new DP signing coming from in the world? Would it be similar to Nico or Raul, or is the league moving more towards signings from non-top 5 leagues in Europe?
I think the Sounders cast a pretty wide net. It does seem like Europe is more of a focal point, and I think that especially for like more in prime DP signings, and I think that makes sense just in terms of MLS's rising stature globally. South American prospects outside of the very, very top end, who MLS teams still wouldn't really have a shot at unless they're Atlanta and are willing to throw an insane amount of money at a player, probably aren't going to be interested in coming here. But a 24-year-old from Belgium probably would, if they're not going to be able to make that next big move in Europe. So that seems the most likely. But I mean, I think there's still good young players coming from South America, decent and prime players coming from South America or from Mexico. I think it just depends on what the team is looking for, what profile of player they're looking for, and who they feel like is on their radar. And, I think a lot of the time we think of the team's scouting efforts in terms of the big splashy DP signings, which makes sense because those are the most exciting ones. But they have a history of signing players from everywhere. I mean, they've signed players from every continent, I think. And they've signed good players from every continent. Don't say Antarctica.
I was going to say Australia.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. Brad Smith was Australian.
That's a very fair point. That's a good point.
I mean, he was playing in England. But
I think that's a legit point. That's a legit point. So you got me.
Yeah,
you got me.
I'll say every confederation, right? They've signed players from every confederation. That is technically accurate. So, I think they're looking everywhere, and they should be. I mean, MLS is not at a level where they can just focus on the hotbeds of talent. They have to kind of scour the globe in a way that maybe bigger clubs don't. But
not to pick on Nate B either. I'll note that neither Nico nor Raul came from top 5 leagues either. There aren't a lot of like the number of players that come to MLS from top 5 leagues who are like not sort of like who are achieving things at top 5 leagues is pretty small, actually.
Well, the way I read that was Nico or Raul didn't come from Europe, right? Because like it used to be most DPs were either big signings from old guys or South Americans, right? And Nico came from Boca. That was how I read it, but
maybe you're right. Well, anyway, I'm not. We don't need to be pedantic about any of this.
Yeah. But yeah, I do think the league is moving away from signing old European guys, which is good.
For sure. The number of older, like the number of DPs or any players, foreign players that are coming into the league older than 30, let alone, really on the older side is getting pretty small. Like most players that are moving here almost certainly players that require a transfer fee are almost exclusively coming here, in their 20s.
People laughed at Don Garber a lot when he said all that stuff about becoming a league of choice and becoming a top 10 league in the world and blah, blah, blah. And I mean, he was maybe a couple years late, but it's hard to argue with the state of the league.
Well, I think it was interesting, not to get too far on a tangent, but it was an interesting tonal change this year at the State of the League address, where he wasn't really talking aspirationally anymore about getting bigger and turning MLS into an even bigger league. A lot of it was sort of, we've arrived at where we feel comfortable a little bit, and it's about managing they're not plotting big changes to push them higher up the hierarchy. It's like, they're in the top 10 to 15 leagues in the world now, and they're kind of comfortable with that, and they can make a good business out of that. And who knows, maybe farther down the line we'll get where we're talking about like pushing into the top 5 leagues in the world or something. I don't know how realistic that is, but I mean top 10 was always sort of targeted, because you get around 10 and you're like, well, who do you really think you're going to pass now?
Right.
Like, do you think you're going to pass Ligue 1? Do you think you're going to pass Serie A?
Right.
Like you're getting into that territory. So anyway, it's an interesting tonal change. That's all.
Right. And I think refreshing too, because I think there is a point where you have to realize, okay, we've kind of hit our ceiling for the realities that we're in right now, and we should consolidate success and work on sustainability. So it's good to hear they recognize that. This one's from Mindy. What do you think Paul's role will become in 2025?
I think he is going to be a rotational starter. Like he started like something like 16 straight games at one point this year, I think it was, before he missed the last 2 games. And I think that is a much bigger, that I don't think he's going to play that sort of role where he's starting virtually every game, sometimes twice a week. I think just across the board, the way that the roster is setting up, I think there's going to be a lot more rotation. That seems to be part of the plan. In fact, is that they're trying to create a scenario where they can almost have two squads that can both be, reasonably effective. And I think Paul's going to get plenty of minutes. My suspicion is somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 minutes across all competitions would be maybe a little more than that. But, if he's healthy, he'll probably get 10 to 15 starts, which would be great.
Yeah. Yeah. There's going to be, what's the minimum number of games they can play next year?
42, like 40, it looks like.
42. And that's the minimum. I think the expectation is that they'll play more than that.
I mean, it's not hard to get to 50. Like if they advance out of the first round of CONCACAF Champions Cup, that's right there. That's two more. You're at 44. If you win a couple Open Cup games, which we don't know if they're going to be playing in, but let's just assume they play the Open Cup games. So you're at 46. They get out of the Leagues Cup group stage. You're talking 47, 48. You're in playoffs.
Yeah.
You're playing two right off the bat. I mean, that's 50.
Yep. Yeah.
Right there.
There's going to be a ton of minutes to go around, and it's why.
And that's not without even advancing very far in any of these things.
Yeah. It's why when signings that are sort of veteran depth signings like Arriola or, what have you are suggested, and people worry about minutes, not being available to younger players. There's going to be plenty of minutes to go around. And I think if you have championship aspirations and you want to still be competitive in a bunch of competitions, you have to be willing to say, we don't have a set 11 guys that are going to start every game that they're healthy. You have to rotate. And so, yeah, I think, and having Paul and Georgie as your primary attacking rotational guys is very good.
Yeah, I think the Georgie's role will be more interesting to watch. And I suppose that speaks to if the Sounders are being a little bit more conservative about bringing in another big name player right now. I suppose it's because they do feel like they have younger guys in the squad who deserve to not be completely pushed out of the rotation. I don't know how much of the thinking that is, but anyway. This is from Bill Jones Trumpet. I think that's what we're going to start calling him. I think that's what it stands for. So we're just going to go Bill Jones Trumpet. We're now like 8 years into you saying his name on the air.
Right. I think you've been saying that for a couple of years now too. So
sticking with the idea that the defense wins championships, should we expect to have the same defensive prowess next year? Are there any moves we need to make to secure what we have, maybe reinforce our depth or even improve it? Sure, I want a DP attacker, but the team taught me to love watching $10 million attackers leave Lumen Field empty-handed.
So we got a similar question last year before the season, or at the end of the season, sometime during the offseason. And I gave pretty much the same answer I'm going to give now, which is that we should not expect them to be as good as they were this year. We should expect them to be good. I think they're going to be, again, one of the best defensive teams in the league. But I just don't think you can count on being that good defensively year in and year out.
Though this is like 4 of the last 5 years, there have been one of the top 2 or 3 defenses.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's true. I think the odds of the Sounders being as good defensively as they were this year next year are probably better than the odds of Albert Rusnak having as good of a year as he did, right? So I don't know if that's good or bad, but I don't think you can assume that they will be as good. And technically they weren't as good this year. They gave up 35 goals versus 32.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
So I think they're still going to be very, very good defensively. In terms of reinforcing the depth, it's interesting. We talked about Nathan, I think, on the last show, and how we sort of the decision whether or not to bring him back got a little more difficult. Ultimately, they decided not to. And so I think we really like Bell, and he played a lot more than Nathan did this year. But you can't assume that Reagan and Yamar are going to be as healthy. And then you've also got more competitions that you're playing in. So Bell is going to get more minutes. And so do you feel comfortable with Stuart Hawkins picking up the minutes that would have gone to Bell had Nathan come back or whoever, right? Or do you feel like you need to bring in another veteran center back? I think that's a big question. I think if you are planning to move to 3 at the back, you probably need to have at least 2 center backs you feel really comfortable with getting a decent chunk of minutes. So I wouldn't mind some defensive depth. Yeah, because I think it's going to be tested just like the depth everywhere else.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what ends up happening with this Leo Burney guy who they signed, who I will admit was completely off my radar. I guess I knew the name vaguely, but the Sounders are really high on this guy. He spent 4 years at University of Pennsylvania. He was a 4-year all Ivy League first team. He won the Ivy League Defender of the Year twice. He was on Ballard FC for 3 seasons. Sounders watched him a lot. He played, I think all 4 years. He played like 3 or 4 years with the Sounders Academy. I don't know that he's, MLS ready, but he's the kind of player who you'd be thrilled to get out of the draft. And it's not unheard of. I mean, he's 23 years old, so he's at an age where he could potentially play. I don't think the Sounders necessarily feel like they have to go out and get, I bring this up because I don't know that the Sounders feel like they have to go out and get a veteran center back. I think Stuart Hawkins can also manage more minutes than he effectively didn't play last year. I think he could probably, if he continues to bulk up, I think he can be a player who can take some minutes. Nuhu can go back there. I suppose Josh Atencio even can move back into center back if you're going to be playing 3 at the back. So, I mean, I don't think they shouldn't feel like they have to go out and make big, or even like I hope they would not go out and spend $500,000 on a third center back. I'll say that, which is what they did on Nathan.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think in hindsight, not bringing back Nathan was a pretty obvious decision. He just played so well in the playoffs that it hurt a little more than I was expecting it to. I guess to let him go because.
Yeah, it was funny because up until that playoff performance, it was almost like he was the most obvious guy to not bring back. And then I was shocked at how many people were really like, no, I really wanted to bring him back, which I get. I mean, he played well, and I hope he lands somewhere because I think he's a good player.
Yeah, I think he's a very good defender, but I mean, that money could probably be spent better elsewhere. Next one's from Tim Hamilton. It's a 2-part question. Who's writing the checks for DPs? And if the Sounders sell a player like Obed for $10 million, what's the breakdown as far as where the money can be used?
So as far as who writes the check for the DPs, that's ownership. Adrian is the majority owner. I don't know if he actually owns 50 plus 1%, but he writes the biggest part of that check. But I think my understanding is every owner basically pays an even share. They're not an even share, their percentage share of any sort of like capital expenses like that. Although maybe it's not quite that. It might be a little different. Maybe there's some sort of operating budget that it comes out of. I don't know exactly, but I mean, Adrian is the person that essentially has to greenlight it. So I suppose you could put it on him. And if they sell a player like Obed, they can convert 3 million of that into general allocation money. They get to keep because he's a homegrown player, they keep all of it. And then the other 7 has to be reinvested into the team. But what counts as reinvestment into the team is a sort of a grab bag of stuff. It could be things like future transfer fees, but I think it can also be things like funding the academy or maybe even funding infrastructure like Longacres. So it can go to a lot of places, but I think the thing most people care about is the general allocation money and 3 million of that. But you can only do 3 million for all. If you like, one of the things that's interesting, if you were to trade, let's just say that they were to sell Reed for $5 million and Obed for 10, theoretically they could convert $6 million of that into general allocation money, but you can only do $3 million in a year. So they would have to stagger that in a way where the payments were, maybe not all coming in at once, so that they could spread out the general allocation money over multiple seasons. But
yeah, I mean, aren't transfer fees typically paid in installments anyway?
they are, yeah. So that wouldn't be super strange to do that, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. I can imagine that sounds dumb to have that restriction, but when you think about what a team having $6 million in general allocation money at one time could do to the competitive balance, I kind of get it. Because that's basically another full payroll outside of DPs that you could just be spending money on. So
yeah. This is from Everett Sounder. Are there any free agents within the league this offseason that could legitimately add to this team?
Yeah, I think we looked through the list pretty pretty closely, and I think the name that really popped out that was interesting was Jeremy Ebopsi, who was a really good player at one point, but I just am not sold on being worth taking a punt on at this point, other than it would be nice to have him not playing against us wherever he ends up, because he has terrorized us for years. There are a lot of great players who would have really helped like 3 years ago, if they had been available. But right now maybe not as much. But yeah, we could have had Carlos Vela or Jackson Ewell, Victor Wanyama. Lots of notable players. They just aren't really any good anymore.
Yeah, I thought this year's crop had a lot of players who should fetch multiple offers. Jack Elliott to me is sort of the cream of the free agent crop.
Yeah.
I honestly don't understand why the Union turned down his option. He's on like, unless he had some huge raise, but he was on $900,000 last year, and he was by some metrics like the best defender in the league at 29. So I don't quite understand why they turned down his option. So I would think he's going to be a hot commodity. Edward Atuesta is another one who I'm not saying the Sounders should go after these players necessarily, but there's a few guys out there. I did a story today that highlighted Jeremy Ebobisi as potentially like a backup striker. I also highlighted Yamil Assad, who is kind of a wing back. He was at FC Cincinnati most recently. That would be an interesting one. And then who was the other player I highlighted? Oh man, I should have had that ready. But in any case, it was I don't necessarily think the Sounders are going to be super active in the free agent market, but it would be interesting. The other one was Latif Blessing. That's right. Latif Blessing, very flexible player. I wrote that his performances have ranged from budding superstar to can't get on the field, which I feel like is a pretty fair way of saying it. But yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting. I think the Sounders are maybe less likely to do anything on free agency if they get both these trades done that they're trying to do. So
yeah,
plan accordingly, I suppose.
The Jack Elliott thing, I guess I somehow missed that he was that's interesting. Maybe if there's a trade market or any kind of market for Yamar, maybe that's a.
Yeah, I mean he's younger than Yamar, but I would think that anyone who's willing to trade for Yamar would
just sign Jack Elliott.
Would just sign Jack Elliott, right?
Yeah. Yep. All right, last one is from Claxon 5. And this is him saying this. This is not me saying this, just to be clear. Nice work to Sounder at Heart and Nico specifically. Well, I am saying the part about Nico specifically. On breaking the Jesus Ferreira story, without giving away too much, what is the life cycle of reporting a rumor like this? How long is it from the time you first hear the name to hitting publish?
I would say it usually depends on a few things. Like sometimes it's like an hour, or it depends on where you get the information from, because there are certain sources that you feel that you need to get multiple sources from because you can't just trust this person by themselves, right? And then there's other stories where it's like, well, this is the story, like they are the source, right?
Yeah.
So I can tell you with the Jesus Ferreira thing, Nico had that story and we published it probably within a couple hours of it, maybe three or 4 hours probably, because we made a lot of phone calls to sort of make sure we were reporting accurately. And I think we ended up settling on language that felt good and as stood up. We didn't get out over our skis, as they say. So yeah, I mean it's usually hours, I would say is probably the most common. I will say I go back to the Longacres story, which I don't know if people care about this stuff, but I broke the Longacres. Sounders were going to be building a training facility at Longacres, and that was like weeks, if not months, of going back and forth and making sure I had all my information correct.
Yeah.
So it's like I guess it depends is the answer.
That Longacre story was one that you were working on for long enough that I kept forgetting that it wasn't public yet and like almost saying something about it.
I worked on it for a really long time because the original sourcing on it was not, I felt like I had to do a lot of double checking. So
right. Yeah.
That's a good example of those two stories are good examples of the extremes of how much time. Right. But I can tell you that for the most part, we very rarely will go with something unless we feel really good about it. If that helps.
That's one of the nice things about Sounder and Heart being independent. And I'm saying this as somebody that doesn't really write for the site, so I feel sort of separate from that part of it a little bit. And this isn't backpatting as much as it might sound. Is that you don't have to write the like, oh, I saw a tweet about a rumor. Well, that'll do some page views, so I guess I got to put it up, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which is the thing that made me hate writing about soccer. Was having to do that for a few years. So I would imagine that that's quite a relief for you and the rest of the folks on the editorial staff.
Yeah. Although it's funny because we just this week I just binned a story that was about Gregory, the guy who the Sounders actually were pursuing at one point. There was a story in the Brazilian media, I think, about how the Sounders were looking to sign him. And I had actually written the story, but I wanted to make sure it was accurate. And so I made some calls and was told like there is absolutely no truth to this story.
Yeah. Right.
So that's what that happens. But we do real reporting, I guess is my point. That's the main takeaway here. But all right, well, that's it, right? That's all the questions.
That's all the questions. There were a few that we had to cut for time, but I tried to cut ones where we mostly answered them in other places. So,
well, yeah, thanks to everyone for submitting these. I don't know when we'll probably do another off-season one. I would think.
I think so.
But our cadence of recording will probably be less frequent, but depends on, I don't know, we might have one next week if things are going the way they're looking in terms of the signing. So if there's stuff to talk about, we'll keep recording. I don't think we'll take like the whole winter break off like we have done previously, but we probably will slow down our cadence a little bit, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So this is sort of the wrap show, I guess, on 2024 season, and looking forward will be, well, I guess we already did the wrap on the season and now we're already in the off season, but whatever, you understand what I'm saying. I wanted to, it was another good year, Aaron. This has been spectacular.
It was. Yeah, we did a good job, Jeremiah.
I think we did. I think we high five.
I think I'm pretty sure that we put out an episode
every week
of the mainline show, which has got to be a first.
Oh, we did way more shows this year than we've ever done. No question about that.
And honestly, I might have had as much fun as I've had doing it.
Good. Oh, so. I'm happy to hear that. I am. Yeah. That's good to hear. Also, thank you to Full Pool Wines for making it through yet another year of sponsorship. That's amazing. Like they've been sponsoring us since 2011. That is
They have
a long time.
I gotta go pay them a visit. I got some nice vino waiting for me up there.
Yeah. And thank you to all of our listeners and subscribers and readers. We are shaping up for a very good 2025. You know, when we did our 1 year anniversary show, I made a comment about how we had just crossed over 2,500 and we were sort of flirting. We were going back and forth over 2,500 subscribers. We are solidly over 2,600 now. So that's, so we continue to grow, and that is great. I'm thrilled about that. I will remind everyone that if you have a Sounders fan in your life and you want to gift them a subscription to Sounder at Heart, you can do that. I would just go to Sounder at Heart. We have a merch table that is linked in the top nav bar, and there are links to buying gift subscriptions, as well as all sorts of affiliate links if you are inclined to buy people all sorts of things that you might want during this holiday season. You can do that there. And with that said, I guess I should probably sign off. I'm Jeremiah O'Shan, signing off for Aaron Campo and Lickett. This is No Sadietes. Remember, you'll never yacht alone.
We love you. Let's win another one!